For the last several weeks, we've been hearing about the miracles of Jesus. First, we heard about nature miracles. Then next, we heard about miracles of healing and miracles of deliverance from demons. I'm going to need a little bit of help here. Maybe Daniel can give me a hand. My clicker isn't moving slides. So for the meantime, I'll have David help me. We'll go to the next slide right now. Here's a listing of some of the things that we've looked at already, the miracles of nature, the miracles of healing, and deliverance from demons. And now we get to a fourth variety of miracles, and that's miracles of divine knowledge. Knowing things that only God could know. Because Jesus himself is God. There's a word for this, a theological word, and that word is omniscience. You've heard that word before. Omniscience means knowing everything. God knows everything, and Jesus Christ, being God, knows everything. There's no doubt of that. Now, there were times when he would show that when he interacted with people, and that would amaze them or startle them enough that it proved to them something about his nature and who he is. I've chosen 12 such incidents. These are things in Jesus' life that clearly depict his divine knowledge, his omniscience. And we'll look at these 12 in our message today. I will tell you from the outset that there are many more things that Jesus did that he knew all than perhaps just these 12, but this will give us a clear idea. The first one we find here in John chapter 1, starting at verse 42, and it concerns a man named Nathanael. Jesus has been calling his disciples, and it tells us that on verse 43, he found Philip and said, "Come, follow me." Philip, verse 44, was from a town called Bethsaida, and Philip went to his friend Nathanael and said, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Let's listen. Philip goes to his friend Nathanael and says, "We've been waiting for the Messiah all these years, and we found him. And we even know his name. His name is Jesus, and he comes from Nazareth." Now, Nazareth seemed to be a little an out-of-the-way sort of a place, and so Nathanael was not terribly impressed. Nathanael says, verse 46, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" "Come and see," said Philip. I like that answer. If you're trying to introduce somebody to Jesus, and they say, "Oh, I don't believe that," rather than having argument or trying to prove it, you might follow Philip's tack and say, "Come and see for yourself." And so that's what he did. He took his friend Nathanael along, and as they were approaching Jesus, Jesus saw Nathanael approaching and said, verse 47, "Here is a true Israelite in whom there is nothing false." Had Nathanael met Jesus before? The answer was no. Did Jesus know Nathanael? Well, in human terms, the answer would be no. But as far as God being man, the answer is, of course, yes. Jesus knew Nathanael. He could say, "I see that you are a real spiritual seeker. You're one who doesn't have a false desire about God. There's something true about you." That took Nathanael back a little bit, and he says, "How do you know me? How can you make this judgment about me if you don't know me?" And Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Now let's understand what's going on. We're going to back up to the previous slide. When Philip had gone out to talk to Nathanael had been seated under a tree, probably in a place of either reading scripture or prayer. It was common that a man in those days might find an outdoor place under a tree to have his devotional time. And so that's where he was when Philip approached him. And when Philip had said, "Let's go see Jesus." And so they walked together, and they were just approaching, and Jesus said, "I know where you just were. Some minutes ago, before you started coming my way, you were seated under a tree, and then Philip came and found you there. And I saw you there. And not only did I see you at such a distance, but I know your heart, your character, and so on as well." Nathanael's astonished. And he says, "Rabbi," verse 49, "you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." He believes. This is the effect of miracles. Did we notice this in all the miracles we've looked at so far in the sermon series? There's a miracle, and it says something about who Jesus is, and it causes people to be astonished, and it causes them to believe. That's certainly what happens here for Nathanael. He says, you are the Son of God, you are the Messiah, you are the heir to the throne of David, you are the eternal King of Israel, you're everything Nathanael said you are. And Jesus says, as their interchange wraps up, he says, well, you believe simply because I told you one thing. I told you I saw you under a tree. You believe all of this. Someday, you're going to see greater things than this. You're going to see angels of God going to and coming from heaven by my power. Now, one thing that I will point out that should be self-evident. Is everyone listening? This is something I'm sure you understand from all of this. Jesus knows you, and he knows all that you are doing. This is a comfort for the righteous and a warning for the wicked. We go next to something about the crowds. We'll go to the next chapter, John chapter 2, at verses 23 to 25. Take a look there. It's the end of chapter 2, starting at verse 23. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many people saw the miraculous signs he was doing and believed in his name. But Jesus did not entrust himself to them, for he knew all men. He did not need man's testimony about man, for he knew what was in a man. This affirms what we just said a moment ago. Jesus knows all people. He knows even what is in their hearts, even in the hearts of each individual in a crowd. Many in Jerusalem saw his miracles. They believed in him. But Jesus knew how unstable their faith was, how immature their faith was. He didn't entrust himself to the crowd. In other words, he didn't become their celebrity. He didn't become their crowd pleaser. He, it says in verse 24, knew all men. Jesus, it says, doesn't need to hear from people about what's in their hearts. He didn't need a testimony where they stood up and they shared, well, this is what I'm thinking about. He already knew. He already knows what is in each man. Let's move forward to chapter 4, and then yet a third incident. This is an interesting thing. Chapter 4, starting at verse 1. Now we move to verse 4. Chapter 4 and verse 4, it says, Jesus was traveling through Samaria, and he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. The 6th hour translates to noon in our time. Jesus was traveling. It was noon. It was hot. He was thirsty. He sat down by the well. Jesus himself wanted water. He could have made water. He could have created it right then. Instead, he does what he typically does. You see, he could have created everything he needed in every moment. But instead, he normally relied on ordinary means, even humbling type means where you have to depend on others. And he said to a woman who comes out to the well, he says to her, I would like it if you would give me something to drink. That means he was going to depend on her to take whatever jar she had, lower it down there, and bring it back up, and give him a little something to drink. Verse 7, will you give me a drink? The Samaritan woman said, well, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman, how can you ask me for a drink? She's very surprised that he's interacting and asking for this because there are different backgrounds in this way. And Jesus said, well, verse 10, if you knew the gift of God, and who it is who asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. She says, well, why are you asking me for some physical water? And he said, well, we're talking about water. If you understood the spiritual things behind this, you would have asked me for something called living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? You have some living water lying around. Where does this come from? You don't have any way to draw it out of this well. Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his flocks and his herds? Not only don't you have means to get any, but I don't know that you're any greater than our ancestors. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Obviously, Jesus is speaking spiritually, saying, I've got a bursting spring of something that will give you refreshment from inside, and she's still thinking something physical, like something that you can drink once and you'll never have to ring the bell again. And so they're not quite communicating. The woman said, "Sir, give me this water," verse 15. "I will never have to come here to draw water again." He said, "Go get your husband and come back." And she said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." Here we come to a miracle of divine knowledge. Has Jesus met this woman before? Not in the way that you would normally think. But he is God, he knows all of her. And he looks at her and says, "Go and get your husband." And she correctly admits, "I don't have a husband." He says, "Well, that's true. You've gone through 5 marriages, and now you are together with a man who's not your husband." This startles her. How could he know this? How could he know this? And she says to him, "Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet." And she begins to ask him spiritual questions, thinking that that was going to be the thing to do. And in the end of that discussion, she says, "Oh, I wish someday the Messiah would come and he could explain all of this to us." And Jesus said to her, "The one you are speaking to now is he. You've been awaiting the Messiah, you're talking to him." Does she believe him? The answer is yes. Why does she believe him? Because he told her about herself, things that only God could know. As it turns out, she runs into town and she tells others about what Jesus has done. She says, "He told me all the things I'd ever done. Come and meet him." Verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony, which was, "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. I want to point out again, miracles enhance people's faith. And that's certainly true of these kinds of miracles of divine knowledge, where Jesus could say, "This was true of you, and this is true of you. God can see you, and he knows you." And she believed it because of that, and then introduced Jesus to many others. Now we're going to turn to the Gospel of Mark in chapter 2. We're making our way through 12 different miracles of divine knowledge. Mark chapter 2 and verse 6. We've already looked at this miracle before, and in fact the next several of them we're going to look at are ones we've touched on before in our teaching, so we're not going to spend long on each of them. But they're ones that include elements of Jesus' divine knowledge. Mark 2 and verse 6. What leads up to this moment is that there was a man who needed to be healed. His friends brought him to Jesus. They couldn't get close because of the crowd. They cleared a place off of the ceiling, the roof of the house where Jesus was, and lowered their friend through the roof right in front of Jesus. You see that in the picture. And Jesus looked at him and said, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, verse 6, some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this is what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking such things? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat, and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone. They praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Now, this is obviously a healing miracle, but something you notice is Jesus' critics are thinking in their hearts, "Why is he talking like that? I don't like this." And Jesus knew in his spirit what they were thinking. And as a result, he then moved to bring the healing in a certain way in response to what they were thinking. There are several things this episode illustrates to us. One, of course, is that Jesus is God, because he said to the people, "I just said, your sins are forgiven," and you said, "Only God can forgive sin." And then I said, "Only God can heal something like this, you're healed." And so once he was healed, he is indicating, I also can forgive. I am God. This incident shows us that Jesus is God, but it also really demonstrates that Jesus not only knows your background and he knows your actions, but he also knows your thoughts. Try that again. He also knows your thoughts. He could tell what was being thought. He knows your thoughts. He is God. He knows everything. Still here in Mark now chapter 5, we'll go to verse 24 and following. Mark chapter 5, it's another incident we heard about in the previous week. There was a lady who had a condition of bleeding. We'll hear something about what went on for her at the end. Mark chapter 5, starting at verse 24. It says, a large crowd was pressing against Jesus, and verse 25, a woman is there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from suffering. Already, because this is written down for us, God knows what it is that she thought. She was thinking, I'd like to be healed, and I don't want to approach Jesus. I'm ashamed to do this. I will just touch the edge of his cloak as he goes by. And of course that was not difficult because there was a mob surrounding him. Well, it was difficult to get close, I suppose, but it was not difficult in the sense of, I have a feeling that if I thought, if only I could go and touch the edge of Augie's shirt, he might wonder, what is he doing? But if there's a crowd, they're all bumping him, well then I could touch him and nobody would know the wiser. Do you understand what I'm saying? She thought, that's what I'll do. She thought that. And it was known, Jesus knew what she was doing, and when she touched him, healing power went out from him, and he turned around and he said, who touched me? Now I want to say something to you. He knew who touched her. I think of it as being a little bit like God coming to the Garden of Eden and saying, Adam, where are you? When God asks questions like this, it's so the individuals can stand up and say, here am I, and talk directly. And so Jesus said, who touched me? And for a moment there was a little commotion, and the disciples said, what do you mean who touched you? You've got bumped every couple of moments by this whole crowd. What do you mean who touched you? And he looked around and said, who touched me? And it's interesting to me that no one else there said, well, I happened to touch you, but I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. Nobody said that. Because they could all tell you meant something specific. Who touched me? And then we found out. She said, I touched you. She said. And he said, your faith has healed you. He notices her that she has true faith. It's a beautiful thing. Jesus knows. He knows the hearts of people. He knows what's going on for them. It's wonderful. One more miracle of healing that we've looked at already before. It's in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. And this is an incident with a man with a paralyzed hand, and in this case, Jesus knows something about what some of the Pharisees are thinking. I'm going to Luke chapter 6, starting at verse 6. On another Sabbath, Luke 6:6, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. I already pointed out that this was really a tragedy. He wouldn't be able to work with his hands the way that a man needed to for most professions. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They thought it was wrong to heal on the Sabbath, and they were trying to trap him. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking. Did you see that? He knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of everybody. So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it? He looked around at them all, and then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But they were furious, and they discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. They wanted to trap him. Jesus knew what they were thinking. He rebuked the Pharisees, and he caused the man to be healed. I won't say too much more about all of the physical healing, because we covered that before, but I will point this out. Are you listening? Jesus knows what his friends are thinking, and he knows what his enemies are thinking. He knows what everyone is thinking. It is not just those who love Jesus and belong to him that he knows what they're thinking. It is those who despise Jesus and wish that they could box him out of their lives. He also knows what they are thinking. He knows each thing that you have been thinking about your relation with him, and each thing that everyone you know has been thinking about his relation with him, because he is omniscient, he is God, he knows all. Now, still here in the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 19, we come to an interesting bit of Jesus' life, his interaction with a man named Zacchaeus. Luke 19, starting at verse 1. Luke 19, 1 and following. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. This is near the end of Jesus' life. He is headed toward his death. He is passing through Jericho. A man was there, verse 2, by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. It was notorious that tax collectors were unethical, and by this means would become wealthy. So that's something that we know about Zacchaeus already. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. Now something else we need to know. He heard that Jesus, who is by now famous, was coming through the area, and he wanted to meet Jesus. Has he met Jesus? No. Does he know Jesus? No. Does he want to know Jesus? He wants to at least see him. That's at least who he wants to see him. The problem with Zacchaeus, besides being unethical, is that he was short. And so the crowd all mobbed around Jesus, and he thought, if I'm standing here on the sidewalk looking at the street as Jesus go by, I won't see a thing because everybody else will be blocking my view. What will I do? He did something very interesting. Those who are dignified and those who are wealthy never would run unless chased by a bear or something. You would instead have your servants who would scurry around and do things, and you would walk with dignity. But he was so interested in seeing Jesus, it says he ran to a nearby tree and climbed up that tree. He ran on ahead, you see, ahead of the pace that Jesus was going. He climbed the tree thinking, from its branch, I'll be able to look down and see Jesus. And I'm going to read to you the miracle. It's very interesting. When Jesus reached the spot, you see, Jesus was walking along, and he got to where Zacchaeus was, and he noted Zacchaeus above him. Now that already shows me Jesus is observant, because I could probably walk under a tree and never notice a person who was hanging from it. But Jesus notes Zacchaeus, but there's more. When he reached the spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Friends, had Zacchaeus met Jesus? Jesus looked up at him and he said, Zacchaeus. How did Jesus know his name? He's omniscient. He knows all people. He looked up in a tree and knew the name of the man who wanted to see him, though I don't think that the man had a name to him. He said, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm coming to your house today. And Zacchaeus clambered down and welcomed him. The people saw this and they muttered and said, oh, he's gone to be a guest of sinners. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay him back 4 times the amount. Jesus said, verse 9, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. That is Jesus' desire to bring salvation to dear souls. And I want to show you a few things. I'll tell you this. First, Jesus knows your name. Jesus wants to come into your life. He wants to stay in your life, in your house. He wants this, even if you have been a sinner, he wants to be with you. And he wants to see a changed life for you. That was true for Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus had cheated many. Some grumbled that Jesus shouldn't be hanging out with such a cheater. But Zacchaeus was transformed. His life was no longer the same. That changed life was a great miracle. He said, I'm going to take the monies that I've gotten wrongly and I'm going to give them back to people who I owe them to, and I'm going to take other monies and give it to people who are in need, and I'm no longer going to be a slave to wealth and that kind of greedy idolatry. That's not what I'm going to do anymore. I'm going to give my life to Jesus Christ. That's what he did. It was a miracle that changed life. That was the great miracle, but it began with a miracle of divine knowledge, knowledge of one word, and that was the man's need. Now Mark chapter 11. Mark 11. It tells us about Jesus continuing on his route to Jerusalem, going there to die. Jesus sent two of his disciples ahead of him, and he said, verse 2, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' tell them, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly.'" Jesus has told his disciples, I need to have use of the donkey. And what you're going to do is you're going to walk into the next town, a very, very small town as it happens. And as soon as you enter it, you don't have to look around. As soon as you enter it, there's going to be a colt, that is, he's given the gender of the donkey. And it's going to be tied right there. And you're going to further know that it's one that's never been ridden before. Now, how does Jesus know that that donkey isn't going to be out in the field somewhere right there? Or that they're not going to bump in first to a different donkey that has no relation to this one? He knows exactly what they're going to see. And he even knows what's going to happen. If they untie and start to walk away, there are going to be people hanging around outside the house there saying, "What are you doing taking this?" And he says, "You answer them this way. The teacher needs it. You're going to back later. And if you do all of that, then we'll go fine." Jesus knew ahead of time where this donkey would be, what the people would say, how it would all go. They went, verse 4, found a colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway. As they untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing untying that colt?" They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. When they had brought the colt to Jesus, threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches out they cut in fields. And it goes on to say those who went ahead in procession shouted things, waved things, and welcomed Jesus as he rode into Jerusalem. Now, for what it's worth, him riding that donkey into Jerusalem was itself something of a miracle. You may recall that it had never been ridden before. I don't think it's possible to get on a completely untrained animal that would be frightened by someone sitting on it and say, "Let's go through a howling mob while people wave things," and for it to say, "This feels really nice," and people keep going. That doesn't happen. But Jesus is Lord of nature, he's Lord over donkeys, and he's also Lord over all knowledge, and he shows that once again here, as he knows specifically where the donkey will be, what it will do, and so on. One of the things that's of interest to me about this is that Jesus knew the present, that is where the donkey was right that moment. He knew the immediate future, that is what people would say and do about them taking the donkey, and he knew the larger future, that is, he knew that he was approaching his death and resurrection. He knew what was coming in the next days ahead. He knew all of it. We come to the ninth of these. The man with the water jar, still here in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 14 now. Chapter 14. Starting at verse 12. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that is Passover, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go to make preparations for you to eat Passover?" Any visitor to Jerusalem would arrange somewhere where he might be able to get together with his family or with his close associates to eat a Passover meal, some portion of a home, somewhere they could go. The disciples said, "Where should we go?" Jesus sent two of his disciples ahead, verse 13, saying, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." Let's see if we understand. Jesus says, you're going to go into the city. Now, the city had 1 zillion people crowded into it. Every visitor from everywhere was there. He said, when you enter it, you're going to be met by a man who's carrying a water jar. Now that's a little bit unusual for me to carry a water jar. That's usually a lady's task. But I ensure that if I walked into a city of that size with that many visitors, I could look for a while to find anybody like a man with a water jar and miss whoever that was. But he said, no, you're going to find this one. He's going to be there. And you're going to follow him. Just follow him wherever he goes. And he is going to take you to a home, and you're going to speak to the owner of that home. And the owner is going to say, I've got an upper room that's not already promised to anyone else to use at this key time. You may use this. And that's where I want you to make these preparations. Well, they found it just the way that he told them to. Let's all listen. It tells us here, the disciples left, verse 16, went into the city, found things just as Jesus had told them. They prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus arrived. Now, somebody here is going to say to me, that's very, very interesting. He knew exactly all those things, but why not just tell them the address? Go to Bob's house on 4th Street, and that's where we're going to do it. Why not? And I will tell you something what I understand. What I believe about this is as follows. Jesus and the 12 were going to go together, and Jesus already knew that one of the 12, namely Judas, was going to betray him. Jesus wanted the privacy of one last night with him without anyone knowing where they would be. If he says to his disciples, go to Bob's house, that's information that not everyone needs right now. Instead, he says to 2 of them, you follow along the guy with the water jar, we'll catch up with you. And in this way, neither Judas nor anyone other than Jesus knows where this will take place. Jesus gives the amount of information that is needed for that moment to accomplish his purpose. How is this relevant to us? The Lord Jesus knows all things now. Does he deign to tell us all things? The answer is no, he does not. He doesn't tell me all things. He tells me just enough for me to know, to obey him, to accomplish his purposes. And then anything else that I might wish to know, he can readily say to me, that's not needful for you to know. I've got the rest of this in my hands. Did you understand all of this? And if I say, but why not tell me more? He can genuinely tell me, if I told you more right now, that would not be helpful to you, and it would not help my purpose in some other way, and we're not doing that right now. This is what I want to share with you, because though I know all things, I'm sharing with you what you need to accomplish my purposes. That is what I understand to be happening here in this incident. But we now have them go and set up everything for that Last Supper, and connected to that Last Supper, Jesus will identify who it is who is going to betray him. This is not a surprise to Jesus. It's not as though we figured it out in the last few days. I want us to hear a verse about something that happened way back a couple of years earlier in Jesus' ministry. I'll even show it to you. It's John 6:64. Jesus said to them, as so many were following him and professing to believe in him, he said, yet there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and who would betray him. A couple of years before it happened, Jesus told his disciples that some who claimed to be his followers didn't actually believe. And he walked through his whole ministry knowing that there was one of his own 12, and he knew which one, that was going to betray him. Do you understand this? Jesus had known this ahead all these years. And now we get to the Last Supper itself, and we focus on Judas. And I'm in John chapter 13. If you look at me there, if you would please. John 13. And we'll start at verse 21. After he had said this, John 13:21, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to the disciple and said, ask him which one he means. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I've dipped it in the dish. Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. And as soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. He paused for a moment. Jesus and the 12 were together. Jesus said, one of you will betray me. And they were all dumbstruck and wondered who he could possibly mean. Peter said, or motioned to or indicated to John, ask him who he means. John was sitting next to him. John leans over and says, Lord, who is it? And Jesus says, well, there's the one I'm going to take the bread and put it in a dip and give it to him. It would be something like some pita bread going into some hummus, something like that. And it was something that a host of an event might do in order to serve each one. He'd dip and give to this one, he'd dip and give to this one. And so he dips it and he gives it to Judas, indicating that was the one. That was the one. Jesus is now indicated. And as we're looking here, Judas took the bread, and when he did so, Satan entered into him. Friends, I'm going to just pause for a moment. You do not want to be persistently disobeying God and find yourself in a place where now the area of sin is opened up enough that Satan comes and takes a foothold in your life. This has happened for Judas, who had persistently disobeyed in certain categories of his life, financially and otherwise, and now finally Satan has gotten a grip on him. And Jesus turned to Judas and said, what you're about to do, go and do quickly. The disciples did not understand just what he meant, what Jesus meant. They thought maybe Judas was being sent on an errand. Maybe it had to do with going and purchasing something. The Bible says that Judas got up and he went out. And it says, and it was night. As he got up and left, the disciples saw the door open and they could see behind him the blackness of night, which would represent to any reader the night of sin and the darkness of Satan that he's now entering into. None of this was a surprise to Jesus. He had carried this day with him for the years of ministry until now, and he knew this was going to happen. He knew something else too. Look with me in Luke chapter 22, if you would, please. This is the last one we're going to look at today, Luke 22, starting at verse 31. By now, Judas is gone. As it happens, Judas had earlier made a deal with some of Jesus' enemies. And Judas was taking money from them in order to convey information about how to arrest Jesus. Jesus knew all that. He knew about his betrayer, but he also knew about one who had denied him, namely Simon Peter. And so here at verse 31, chapter 22, Luke, and verse 31, Jesus says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. He says, Simon, Satan wants to destroy you. I can see this. I know this is true. Satan is trying to destroy your life. But when you have turned back to following me, meaning you will fall. But when you have turned back, you will be strengthening to others who are trying to walk this life. And Simon says, no, I'm strong, he says. I would never fall like that. In fact, I'd go to jail with you. I would die with you, he protests. And Jesus looked at Simon and said, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, no, try again. Before the rooster crows once, you will deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows, meaning before tomorrow morning hits, it's nighttime. It's night. How many hours until the rooster starts crowing? I don't know a lot about roosters, but they seem not even to wait till the daylight. They usually start into this before dawn. Am I right about this? So before we get to the end of tonight, 3 times you're going to claim, you don't know me. And Peter said, never, never, never. I would never do that. That's not true. Jesus knows. He knows. As it happens, you know the rest of that story. Jesus was arrested overnight, and Jesus was taken to trial. And Peter went into the courtyard where Jesus was being tried, and different people approached him and said, weren't you with Jesus? And he said, no. And he swore with vulgar oaths, saying, I don't know Jesus. And then the rooster crowed, and Peter went out and wept. The thing that's interesting to me about this, are you listening, church? It's not just that Jesus knows people's actions in their past. It's not just that Jesus knows things like that, or even knows their thoughts, which are inside of them. He knows their hearts and their intentions better than they do. Peter's thoughts were, I'll stand with you forever. And Jesus looked at him and said, you won't. Jesus knows Peter's heart better than Peter knows Peter's heart. And that's why the Bible can say to us that we are not to trust in ourselves in our own understanding. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. The one thing I can say, church, listen now, the one thing I can say to each one of us is if you say, I know my own mind, I know my own heart, I know what I'm going to do, this is going to work out well, you're probably mistaken. Because it is the Lord Himself who knows you better than you do. It is the Lord Himself who knows the future better than you do. It is the Lord Himself who knows what your temptations and weaknesses are better than you do. And so your job would be to call the Lord and say, I need you. I want you to guide my steps, not me. I need you to do this for me. That is something that we're learning because of Jesus' omniscience. He knows us better than we know ourselves. Ask Him. Trust Him. Now, friends, this does not cover everything that Jesus had divine knowledge about. There's so much else besides that He had divine knowledge about. One of the things that He had knowledge about was His impending death and resurrection, the fact that He would rise again. He said so on many occasions. And that, in fact, is a lead-in, I suppose, to what we're going to be speaking about next week. And that is miracles of raising the dead. And that will be the last of these messages that we have. I'm looking forward to finishing off the year with you. If you can believe it, next Sunday, the last Sunday of this year, as we wrap up our series about the miracles of Jesus.